With all the recent Silent Hill news, I wanted to make a video about what Silent Hill 2 means to me. But then on Halloween, IGN posted an image that said IGN readers vote Silent Hill 2 as the best horror game of all time. The way they determined this is strange. In simple terms, horror games were pitted against each other. Silent Hill 2 had the highest win percentage of all other horror games with 88.5%. Now, disregarding how complicated the process was, there are many fans who agree with IGN. But why? What makes this 21-year-old game such a classic? Join me as we take a look at one of my favorite games of all time, Silent Hill 2. Development of Silent Hill 2 began in June 1999, directly after the completion of the original. The game was created by Team Silent, a production group within Konami. The story was conceived by CGI director Takayoshi Sato, who based it on Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, which you can tell if you know the book. The estimated amount of team members working on the game was around 50 people, while the creative team for the first game remained. They had to bring in 30 people from Konami. Silent Hill 2 shared the same atmosphere of psychological horror as the first Silent Hill game. As the developers already had a rough sense of the game's environment, they focused on its plot first, in contrast to the process used with the first game, which could be why the story is so good and so highly regarded. Psychological elements such as the gradual disappearance of Mary's letter and symbolic holes were incorporated into the game. The team wanted Silent Hill 2's protagonist James Sunderland to reflect the evil against which the protagonist of the first game, Harry Mason, battles. For the game's artistic style, the team drew on a variety of influences, including the work of film directors David Cronenberg, David Fincher, David Lynch, and Alfred Hitchcock, along with films similar to the 1919 psychological thriller Jacob's Ladder, and even painters such as Francis Bacon, Rembrandt, and Andrew Wyeth. Other influences on the game included the 1992 survival horror video game Alone in the Dark, the first Silent Hill game, and manga by Dejiro Morohoshi and Junji Ito. Masahiro Ito designed the monsters in Silent Hill 2, with the concept of soured flesh behind their appearance. The monsters were also incorporated an element of humanity into them. For the most part, the monsters reflect the protagonist's subconscious. For example, the monster Pyramid Head was based on the executioners of the town's fictional history and is intended to be a punisher for James. The two exceptions to this theme are the Abstract Daddy, a reflection of Angela's subconscious and her memories, and the Creepers, which are also seen in the first game. I like these exceptions as they both add to the story of Angela, as well as connect this game to the first one. While researching Silent Hill 2, I was surprised to find out that the game incorporates some references to real-life events. In the original scenario, the developers designed Maria and James with dual personalities. Maria's other personality was Mary, a reference to Mary Jane Kelly, who was Jack the Ripper's last victim, while James was Joseph, a reference to one of the Jack the Ripper suspects. I'm glad they have changed the story, as having both James and Maria have dual personalities would have made the game feel overly complicated in my own opinion. Eddie Dombrowski's name was taken from actor Eddie Murphy during the beginning phases of production, when Eddie was originally designed with a pleasantly optimistic personality. The name Angela Orozco was derived from Angela Bennett, the name of the protagonist in the 1995 film The Net, which they made a TV show about it. The film is somewhat horror adjacent, but I would say it's more suspense. I guess Team Silent were just big fans. Laura's name came from the 1970 novel No Language But a Cry by Richard D'Ambrosio. The book was about a doctor who tried to fix a mischievous girl. In a way, Laura from the book and Laura from the game are similar, with both being hindrances to the protagonist. The developers satirized the perceived accessibility of firearms in the U.S. by allowing James to find a handgun in a shopping cart. I'm so glad the U.S. doesn't have that problem anymore. There are also indications that the layout of Silent Hill was based to a certain extent on the town of San Bruno, California, which has now become one of my dream places to visit. The story of Silent Hill 2 is probably one of the best in horror game history, as it tackles themes of loss, depression, suicide, and more, all while having a sense of hopefulness to it. I won't spoil the game, as I want anyone who somehow comes across this video to play it for themselves, so I'll just be offering a summary of the game. The main character, James Sunderland, arrives at Silent Hill after apparently receiving a letter from his wife, Mary, who had been suffering from an illness and died 3 years before. While exploring the town, he encounters Angela Orozco, a teenage runaway searching for her mother, Eddie Dombrowski, another teenage runaway, and Laura, a bratty 8-year-old who befriended Mary while she was sick at the hospital. While searching a local park, James also meets Maria, a woman who strongly resembles Mary, but has a much more assertive personality. Maria claims that she has never met or seen Mary, and because she is frightened by the monsters, James allows her to follow him. That's all I'll leave you with. Monsters? Yes. The town of Silent Hill is overrun by different creatures. James is surprisingly okay with this, as he doesn't have a reaction to them outside of his first appearance near the beginning of the game. Now, I could go deeper into the characters and the themes of the story, but again, I don't want to spoil anything. Plus, there are other people with other videos that get into much more detail and with better quality. Another reason Silent Hill 2 is still talked about today when it comes to horror games is because of the beautiful soundtrack. It was composed by Akira Yamaoka. The music varies between peaceful yet melancholy songs like White Noise, while also having music that invokes dread into the player, like the darkness that lurks in our mind. I used that song in particular on Halloween to make my house seem scarier to trick-or-treaters. I was so impacted by the soundtrack that I decided to buy the vinyl. The sound enhanced the game to another level as each track complements the town so well. The music has always been a highlight in the series, and Silent Hill 2 is a glowing example of that. It is so good that I believe that it is the best horror game soundtrack of all time. There is no horror game that comes close to it. Now, because this is a video game, I feel I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the actual gameplay. This has been a source of conversation among fans, and ultimately, I believe the gameplay is good. For a 2001 PS2 horror game, it plays pretty well. Now, sure, the game is not always the smoothest. It takes a while to get used to, especially coming from playing current games. Funny enough, when I first booted up the game, I had to change the control scheme to the secondary one because the first one kept messing me up. And the gunplay sort of pisses me off. But luckily, you don't have to use a gun all the time. Using the plank and steel pipe was much better and added to the horror as you had to get closer to your enemies. The bosses were challenging, yet also easy enough to manage, like Pyramid Head. Speaking of him, Pyramid Head is the nemesis of Silent Hill 2 and the Silent Hill franchise as a whole. He has transcended the franchise and has made himself a horror icon. His start came in this game, and from the first time you see him, he leaves an immediate impact on the player and James. From his striking design and his large buster sword, Pyramid Head is something you don't want to look away from. But he's much more than just a big meathead that James has to kill. He has a purpose and is meaningful to James. I don't want to get into the franchise, but a lot of people were disappointed with how Pyramid Head had been handled in some of the games. That's because he was made for Silent Hill 2. He wasn't meant to show up for other people, but was rather specific to James Sunderland's experience in the town. Again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but the game does tell you more about him at the end, and his appearances in this game are absolutely fantastic. While Silent Hill 2 isn't the scariest game I've played, Pyramid Head has a commanding presence on screen that definitely adds to the game. Now, you might be thinking, well, Ryan, this sounds like one of the greatest games of all time, but one of the greatest horror games of all time? I don't know about that. And my response would be, sit down and let me cook. While Silent Hill 2 isn't built around jump scares, it still manages to be very scary. The horror is in luring you to places that unnerve you, with enemies that can make your skin crawl. This is helped by the designs of the creatures, including the legendary Pyramid Head. Like I said earlier, it isn't the scariest game of all time. Hell, it might not be the scariest game I've ever played, but to me, Silent Hill 2 scares are underrated in my opinion. In fact, one scene in particular made me jump when I played. Light spoilers, technically. Let me set the scene for you. Maria follows James in search of Laura. They head to Brookhaven Hospital, and after finding Laura and beating a boss, the world transforms and turns into the Otherworld, a staple of the series, as the Otherworld is what sets apart Silent Hill from other horror stories. There are many different interpretations of what the Otherworld is, but in terms of Silent Hill 2, I like to consider it as a reflection of the person experiencing it. So in this context, The other world is a reflection of James. So, back to the scene. James beats a boss and sees the world transform. He reunites with Maria, and they go to the basement of the hospital. When I first entered the basement, I immediately was in awe of the lighting of the room. The shadows casted onto the room were much larger than James and Maria, so I immediately thought that Pyramid Head was in the room. But he wasn't. The room was so dark that the shadow literally looked like his iconic head. It was just that as we moved further away from the door to the basement, our own shadows got bigger. Little did I know, upon turning the corner, Pyramid Head would run up behind James and Maria and start hitting them with his spear. Looking back, it seemed stupid, but seeing Pyramid Head just run the way he did made me jump out of my chair, and I had to pause the screen to catch my breath. It made me appreciate the game even more because I didn't think it would actually scare me. In my opinion, and the opinion of many others, Silent Hill 2 is the greatest horror game of all time. From the story to the music, this game is fantastic, and like a fine wine, it's only gotten better with time. If you stayed to the end and are hearing this, I would like to thank you for joining me for my first video as we look back on one of my favorite video games of all time. I don't know what the next video would be. Maybe a deeper look into James or the themes of the game. Maybe some quick thoughts on the remake or something non-Silent Hill related. But who knows? Anyways, I'm done rambling. So until next time, goodbye.